Good afternoon. Welcome back to Passionate World Talk Radio Network LLC. Educate, enlighten, entertain. And today our special guest is Judy Wright. Not only is she an author, but she's an historian and what we like to call an intuitive wise woman. There are not many of us running around, so it's always nice to have another one joining us today in the studio. And today she is going to be talking about writing your own family story, which is very important. So good afternoon, Judy. How are you today?
I'm very, very blessed. I live in Montana and it's cold here right now, but we have a nice warm house and a nice warm puppy to snuggle with. So I'm very blessed.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear it. It's kind of contrary with the weather. On Thursday, it was 73 degrees. And then a storm blew in and the temp went down to about 30. We were supposed to get snow, but we were lucky. It missed us. And all we had was a quarter of inch of ice on the road. And we were told to stay home, which is fine with me because I don't like driving on black ice. Not because I'm a bad driver, you understand, ladies and gentlemen. It's because everybody else are bad drivers, and I want to protect myself.
So, Lillian, are you in Texas?
I am in Wernersville, Pennsylvania.
Okay. Well, two of our kids live in Dallas, and they had the same thing. Everything shut down because they're not used to ice on the road.
And they're not used to snow either. I formerly lived in Houston, Texas, and if there are 3 flakes that show up on your windshield, the schools are closed down.
That's right.
And after that, everybody else follows suit. But we're not going to talk about weather. We're here to talk about Judy Wright and what she does and the book she's written. And you really need to go out and take a look at her 2 websites because they're really spectacular. Not so much in color, but they contained a lot of information and content. So if you're a parent, she works with parents, but she also works with teens. She's a relationship coach. And having brought up a child by myself for 15 years during the 70s and 80s, it's not an easy job. And since there are no manuals really that are given to you once you give birth to your child, whether natural or under ether, it really is what I call a crapshoot to raise a good child or children while keeping your sanity at the same time, which is all part of your life story.
That's true.
And I don't know about your kids or grandkids, but they don't believe me when I said I used to be your age at 8 years old.
Hang on just a second.
Certainly.
I want to get another book that we just wrote and distributed to all of our children and grandchildren. And this book is A Legacy of Love.
It's great. Hold it up a little bit so everybody getting a little more to this. Perfect.
There we go. And this is called an ethical will. And right now it's very inexpensive on Amazon because the publisher wanted to make it really cheap so I could buy lots of copies to give to family and friends. But it's really, really good. It's a guide to life. And an ethical will is a life story that where the patriarch or the matriarch or the elders of a tribe are sharing their views and their spiritual views and their values and their dreams for their children, their children's children, and their children's children. So it's a life story that's very, very, let's see how we're going to get this.
That's fine. You're doing right. Just a little more to this. Okay, perfect.
There we go.
Yes. It's important because kids of today need what I call an anchor.
Yes. Yeah.
And it keeps them aware that the generations change.
Mm-hmm.
What you have in your books.
But values remain the same.
But values remain the same. And for those who really don't understand how to go about doing it, let me make this suggestion to you. When I raised my son, I used the 10 Commandments. Very easily understood, very descriptive, very graphic, and simple to understand. And you're going to say, Lillian, does it work? And I can tell you, yes.
Well, we also did that, and I developed a fun little game that helped our children learn the 10 Commandments in 10 minutes.
Good.
So I can share that with your readers if anyone's interested. It plants a thing in their mind so that they can easily just, what's the third commandment, and it's very easy to remember. But part of the reason that we wrote the ethical will is because we've both written our life stories, and our children have heard our stories, and they knew their grandparents, but their children and their children's children won't necessarily have an opportunity to hear those stories unless we share them. So here is my mother's life story, and it's very small, and she just dictated to me. She laid on the sofa and I just typed it, and we did a little envisioning, walking through her house. That's how we ended up doing her will too, and attached a story to each piece that she was giving different people. But this was such a great thing. And so I asked Mom, would you like to share this at your 90th birthday or at your funeral? She says, oh, let's give it away at my 90th birthday. And one of the things I want to teach the audience, because they often say, I'm not sure what to write about, or I'm not sure what to do. And as you're writing, a title will kind of rise to the top. And on the very last day, she said, my life hasn't been a bed of roses, but there were more roses than thorns. And so it's called More Roses Than Thorns, a reminiscence of the first 90 years of my life. And it's just filled with photos and stories. And I, believe it or not, Lillian, am a very active TikToker. And so my handle for TikTok and for Instagram is Judy Helm Wright, lowercase. And what I do is I just share writing prompts. Tell me about what your father did, or finish this sentence for me. My grandpa was the kind of man who, and it gets people thinking of stories, and it doesn't always have to be a story even this long. It can just, even if it's just a letter to your kids, or if it's a note left on the kitchen table, or a note tucked in a lunchbox. It means the world to them, and you will find them saving it and treasuring it and love forever. One of the books I think I sent you is this one, Write Your Family Story.
Yes.
Leave a Living Legacy. Well, I could never find that. There's our camera. And, one of the fun stories that I shared in here was how I got the name of Auntie Artichoke. And the term auntie is given out of respect by Native American or indigenous people. And I got that when we lived in Hawaii and I taught parenting classes. And an auntie is someone who is very wise and who loves unconditionally. And artichoke has always been my logo, because often the families I work with, or even people who are writing their life stories, are pretty closed, and sometimes the edges are a little prickly. But if you have warmth and patience, then it opens up and you get to the real treasure, which is the heart. And that's how I came to be called Auntie Artichoke. There we go. Judy Wright, also known as Auntie Artichoke, Finding the Heart of the Story in the Journey of Life. And if you want me to, I can share some of these little ways that you can write your life story.
Oh, please do.
Okay, because they're different. I think people tend to think, oh, if I have to write a memoir, that's too hard. I'm not smart enough. I'm not, I don't know how to do that. But a memoir is like the strand of pearls. This is your whole life. This is your autobiography. But a memoir is maybe this much, or even this much. And a memoir is a very specific time or a very specific theme that you want to write about that can teach or leave a moral or can help the reader. So that's a memoir. Once again, this is an autobiography, is this whole great big thing. And a lot of times autobiographies are fascinating, but a lot of times they're pretty boring because we want to know what Lillian had for breakfast, her favorite breakfast when she was a little girl. What we don't want to know is what she had for breakfast every single day. We just want a short little thing. And then you'll never, ever regret writing something, no matter how small it is. So I've gone through an anecdote is something like you would read in the Reader's Digest, a little short piece, usually 250 words. And there was a wonderful trend a few years ago on the 6-word memoir. Could you write about your life story in 6 words? Loved, married, enjoyed, wisdom, just one of the saddest ones that was ever written was the baby shoes were never worn. Which once you hear that, you can identify with that. Another one, Lillian, you said you only had one son, but I bet you kept a baby book for him. We usually do for one. And that's so much fun to go back and read. This last year at Christmas, we have 6 young professionals who all make more than we ever thought of making. They're so smart. So what could we give them? So what I did was write an essay for each of them about when they were born, what was going on in the world, what was going on in our family, where we were, and a little bit about their birth. And they loved it. They just loved it. Then a biography is if I said to Lillian, let me write your story. And a lot of times you'll see in bookstores or Costco or Walmart or anything, the official Bill Gates biography. That means Bill Gates gave them a few notes and an outline. He didn't write it.
Right.
And almost no celebrities have written their own, even though it says Naomi Judd on it. She didn't really write it.
Yeah.
And this is a great one, Naomi Judd. This was a wonderful book. I loved it. And her theme was she had she had depression that could not be solved by medicine. And so that was her thing. But the interesting thing when people say, I'm going to write a bestseller, this was a bestseller, but I bought it at the Dollar Tree for $1. That's called a reminder. And calendars our day timers are a great source to write your life story because they remind you not just of what the weather was, but your meeting with so-and-so, and caregiver notes and reflection. When my mom was in the TLC unit, I kept a communication log right there. And every day I would ask the nurses and the CNAs and the janitors to make little notes about how my mom was doing. And then I could write thank yous to them. And it was a great thing of knowing that we were all communicating about the same thing. And Christmas letters, I know everybody hates them, but I have collected ours over the year, and it's actually a family history. It's a wonderful collection. Cookbooks. Oh, I forgot to I have about 3 or 4 cookbooks that I've helped co-author. And that's, you write a little story, or you write your recipe, and then you write a little story. The intergenerational one that we did was Reflections from the Kitchen Table, or Kitchen Table Wisdom. And those are good. And then diaries and journals. We don't do that as much as our ancestors did, but we love to find diaries. My great grandmother was an herb doctor to the Paiutes. And so I have letters from her writing back to her mother. And those are priceless. I love them.
I would think so.
Yeah. And emails, we tend to write short emails, but a lot of time those give us little clues about what we want to expand on. The other one is eulogies. Have you ever gone in the paper and read an obituary about a friend of yours who lists all of the fun things she's done, and you think, oh my gosh, I wished I would have known that about her. We would have had so many more connections. Or, oh my gosh, she grew up 10 miles from where I grew up, and those obituaries and those eulogies are a great thing to pass on to the next generation. And then those fill in the blank books, we all get them, but quite frankly, nobody ever does them. Nobody will ever fill those out unless someone's doing it for you. Someone's saying, hey, Graham, what did your mom wear when she was a teenager? And guest books. For our 50th anniversary, we had a guest book, and then we asked people to write a little note of how we had met or something we had done together. And that's a wonderful history that's fun to look back on. And journals, of course, and last wills and testaments. And wills are when you're giving away something tangible.
Right.
But an ethical will is not tangible. It's spiritual. And this is the one where you don't share a tangible thing. And I think every family's had somewhere along the way that everybody wanted grandma's gravy ladle. Nobody cared about her antique table. They all wanted the gravy ladle. And every one of them say, no, she promised it to me. No, she didn't. She promised it to me. And so a last will spelling out who gets what means such a difference to people and why you're giving it. Legal records. And this is, my ancestors came from Kentucky, and they ferried mail from one part of, I can't name, Cumberland River, maybe, I don't know. But
Cumberland Valley, yeah.
Yeah. And so to find that out and to find that legal description of where their store was and the ferry was means a great deal, because in every generation of my family, there have been postal workers, including our daughter, who does that. And then letters. I bet anyone listening to this who has had a father that was in World War II or Vietnam will have had some letters that their mother kept or the grandmother kept. And what a tragedy that right now, yesterday, Russia invaded what's the word? Where did they invade? Ukraine, yeah. And we won't have a copy of those letters that those soldiers are sending back, because there won't be letters. There will be Zooms. But we can capture that. And that's priceless. And lists and lists and lists, and medical records. That's a very important one to go back. Like if does your son have children?
Oh yeah, he has 3 kids.
So if one of them develop a medical issue and he says, Mom, could this be inherited? You can go back and find out. And that's called a genogram. And it's where you write what each generation, their medical things were. Did they have lots of cancer? Was there autoimmune diseases? Was there diabetes? Was there alcoholism? All of those things are inherited. They're in our DNA. And so medical records are important. And, newspapers, right now in this age of information, you can type in your grandfather's name and where he came from, or where he lived the majority of his life, and find everything that's ever been written about him in a newspaper. And that's such a great source of information. Oh, shoot, sorry. Hang on a minute. Dwayne, I'm on an interview. Sorry, that's what happened.
Okay, life happens.
Yeah, but anyway, so there's so many different ways that you can capture some part of your life story, and your descendants will be so grateful that you have done that. Now, I've just blabbed on and on. Lillian, why don't you ask me some specific questions?
Well, actually, you've done pretty well answering a lot of the questions that our viewers probably would like to know. But why don't you, because it's time for us to wrap it up, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you on the World Wide Web, how they can get in touch with you? You have a lot of books on Kindle, so direct them to the right page on
Amazon.
Thank you. And any other information that is upcoming that you will feel will be of great value to them.
All right. Well, thank you for this invitation. I would like to invite people, I mentioned before Auntie Artichoke, but my logo and my website is artichokepress.com. So it's that's my main site. And then on life story writing, I invite you to go to www.memoirlifestorywriting.com. memoirlifestorywriting.com. And you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at lowercase Judy Helm Wright. I'd love to meet you.
Now, do you have a contact page or an email in which they can email you and ask you any additional questions that they may have thought of that has escaped me?
Yeah. And that contact, actually, if they go to Memoir Life Story Writing, they get this book for free.
Okay, well, that's pretty good. That's very good. Ladies and gentlemen, it's really, I would say, imperative that you leave some kind of life story with your kids. And I'll tell you why. Most of our grandparents, or my grandparents, were born during the late 1890s. Mm-hmm. And let's face it, they went through a lot of technological changes between the 1890s. My grandmother made it past Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And I got to tell you that her life story is awesome. But she was also faced with a lot of different things, if you want to put that way. She went through 2 world wars. Think about it. World War I, World War II. She went through Korea, and she went through Vietnam.
Yep.
She went through no electricity, no plumbing, no central school district, no nothing, to living in New York City and seeing it change. She walked down Fifth Avenue for women's rights and was thrown in jail for one night. And her doctor husband said, didn't surprise me. Hers was an arranged marriage and they hated each other on sight, but they managed to make it work.
That's right.
Your grandkids, great grandkids are going to say to their parents, Grandma and Grandpa, they were born in the late 40s, early 50s, and then they went through all the little wars in between, plus Khrushchev banging on the table down in Cuba, and a whole assortment of things, plus technology changed drastically to the information age.
Yes, it's
and
right.
Robots and artificial intelligence. Trust me, your grandkids and great grandkids would want to know how you handled all those massive changes.
That's right.
So it's really important. The other thing I want to divulge is that the U.S. Library of Congress has stories, and they're inviting people like us, the grandparents, to contribute them. So if you want to become part of your country's history, I suggest strongly you get in touch with the Library of Congress, and find out what you need to do in order to have your story heard, because it's not just a personal thing. It's for the whole country.
That's
and
right.
I think that's wonderful, because most countries don't leave that type of heritage for the upcoming generation, and they need to learn about you.
Well, and they need to learn what we have learned.
Exactly.
Here, and that and I have contributed a number, especially a number of veteran stories to the Library of Congress. So it is important, and I'm grateful you brought that up. I'm grateful you invited me to come today, and I really would be grateful if the listening audience goes to memoirlifestorywriting.com. It will benefit them, and it will benefit their children and their children's children, and so many others who are waiting for their message of wisdom.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you what, there are a lot of school districts that are also asking grandparents, which you are now are, if you're my age, to go in and talk about their history.
That's right.
So you can share your story. It's important that you do, because a lot of these kids don't really have any understanding of the type of world that is now as compared to 50 years ago. And it's important that they learn. Lillian, so please go visit Judy Wright's site.
Real quick, I have to tell you that last week I also wrote my 8-year-old grandsons. I do this for my grandchildren when they're 8, when they're 12, and when they're 16. My life so far. So his was called The First 8 Years of My Life. And I found out things when I was interviewing him that when I shared it with his parents, they said, we didn't know that. We didn't know that was his best friend. We didn't know what scared him. This is great. So if you want a bit of life story, interview your grandkids.
Absolutely. Get in the practice. Thank you all very much for joining us today with Judy Wright. And thank you all very much for listening. You can hear us on youtube.com/PWR network _PW Talk Radio. You can also hear us on linkedin.com/PWR Talk Radio. You can also hear us on facebook.com/PWR network, and our website, https://passionateworldtalkradio.com. Thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon. And remember, hang in there. The best is yet to come.
That's true. Thank you again.
You're quite welcome.